On April 7, 2019, Kofi Kingston made history. For the first time in 67 years of the WWE, it had a world champion who'd been born in Africa. From his humble beginnings to an almost 6-month championship reign, here's the truth behind Kofi Kingston. Kofi Kingston, or to use the name he was born with, Kofi Sarkodie-Mensah, is not Jamaican. But in the world of pro wrestling, people have often claimed backgrounds that weren't their own. In the 90s, the legendary Mick Foley cut a promo referencing this particular phenomenon, noting he'd, quote, seen it all 100 times through the magic of pro wrestling. I've seen a tough Jewish kid from Brooklyn become a black man from Macon. I've seen a farm kid from Nebraska become an overnight rap star sensation. I've seen a kid from New Hampshire become a Frenchman. When Kofi debuted in WWE in 2006, it wasn't as someone who had been born in Ghana and grew up in Boston, as he really was. It was as the Jamaican sensation Kofi Kingston, decked out in Rastafarian colors and putting on an accent to match. But unlike most cases of wrestlers playing characters with significantly different origins than their own, this wasn't a gimmick given to him by a promoter. Instead, it was a joke Kofi came up with himself on the spot. In an interview with New York's Hot 97, Kofi talked about a moment during his wrestling training where each student had to cut a promo. These promo days allowed wrestlers to cut loose, but it's also a chance to show you can work the mic as well as the mat and do something that lets you stand out. Kofi had been listening to Damian Marley's Welcome to Jamrock album and decided to cut a promo in a Jamaican accent.
And then they told us we were going to have a promo day, so I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Let me try this Jamaican character out. So I said, well, what's going on, y'all? I'm Kofi Kingston.
The other wrestlers loved it. Kofi kept performing the character, and soon after, he was signed to WWE. As he played the Jamaican character, Kingston was getting heat from both sides. Jamaicans, who were justifiably angry that WWE was billing him as the first ever Jamaican superstar to work for the company, despite the fact that he'd never been to the island, and Ghanaians, who assumed he was playing a Jamaican character because he was ashamed of his actual heritage. The second group found the gimmick pretty easy to spot, too, since, as he said,
Kofi is a very Ghanaian name.
Yeah, man.
It's like Mike, or John. You know what I'm saying? Kofi. It's the name given to a boy born on Fridays.
Then came the October 19th, 2009 episode of Monday Night Raw. During a segment where a team of superstars were fighting amongst themselves, Kofi grabbed the mic and said, in his real voice, that they all needed to come together and work as a team. The response from a very confused Triple H, I got a question. Matter of fact, I have a problem. Aren't you supposed to be Jamaican? With that, the gimmick was dropped, aside from Kofi continuing to use his very Caribbean-flavored entrance music. If you've seen one clip of Kofi Kingston in action, it was almost certainly from one of his appearances at the annual Royal Rumble, a crowded battle royal where wrestlers are eliminated if they're thrown over the top rope and both feet touch the floor. The feet touching the floor rule is built for dramatic moments where someone is almost thrown out before making a recovery. Kofi always goes just a little bit further than most in skirting the rule, and it's become his annual trademark. In 2012, Kofi saved himself from elimination by walking on his hands. In 2013, he landed on the broadcaster's table, then used one of their chairs to hop his way back. 2014 saw him caught by a fellow wrestler who then draped him across the barrier, separating the crowd from the ring, leading Kofi to make an incredible leap back. In the years since, he's crowd surfed, been carried by his tag team partners, and even hopped on one foot using a platter of pancakes to avoid touching the floor. Yet even with all that, Kofi Kingston has never actually won the Royal Rumble or even made it to the Final Four. Early in his career, Kofi Kingston often traveled with fellow wrestler CM Punk, and, perhaps ironically, given his typical role as a squeaky clean good guy in the ring, the two wrestlers often found themselves having to deal with the police. At a panel at a comic book convention, Punk told the story of what he called one of many times that he and Kofi had been pulled over while traveling together, as the heavily tattooed, formerly long-haired wrestler and MMA fighter said, "Because of how I look, and I'm with an African-American gentleman with dreadlocks, and you cannot tell that cop that there is no weed in the car." The ironic part? Punk, in both real life and in character as a pro wrestler, is straight edge. Those heavy tattoos include drug-free across his knuckles. Punk was driving when the pair got pulled over, and when the police officer insisted that Kofi get out of the car, he did so and was promptly handcuffed while Punk stayed in the driver's seat. By the end of the night, there were a total of 8 police cars, including K9 units, surrounding the two wrestlers for what had been a simple traffic stop, leading Punk to seriously worry that they would be arrested on false charges. Fortunately, that didn't happen, and while Punk says that he went off on the cops with a scathing promo-style rant, the ever-polite Kingston kept a much cooler head. The one brief blip in Kofi's status as the eternal good guy came in 2014 with the formation of the New Day, a trio made up of Kingston, Big E, and Xavier Woods. For the most part, their particular brand of villainy involved playing the trombone and derisively calling their opponents booty. Originally, though, it seemed like the group was going to go in a very different and much more serious direction. On Raw in summer 2014, there was a segment where Kofi and Big E, having lost a tag team match, were approached by Xavier Woods. Woods, wearing a white suit with glasses, a very uncharacteristic look for him, told them that they couldn't get ahead in pro wrestling by shaking hands and kissing babies, and that we do not ask any longer. Now, we take. From that original segment, it appeared that the concept for this new stable was going to be 3 black wrestlers who had become fed up with not getting opportunities despite their hard work, with at least a few undertones about the company's real-life history of undervaluing black wrestlers. It's a premise that WWE had used before to varying degrees of success in the 90s, and it's a far cry from what we eventually got when the team made their official debut a few months later. So what happened? Those original segments aired in late July 2014. On August 9th, in Ferguson, Missouri, a black teenager named Mike Brown was fatally shot by police officer Darren Wilson. The incident brought issues of racism and violence sharply into the public consciousness. It's entirely possible that this had nothing to do with the way the 3 wrestlers were eventually debuted as the New Day in November, with no real mention of the storyline from over the summer. Given the timing, however, it's easy to speculate that someone at WWE realized having a team of black wrestlers railing against racial injustice and portraying them as the bad guys would be an even worse idea in 2014 than it had been in the 90s. When Kofi Kingston, Xavier Woods, and Big E re-debuted in November of 2014 as the New Day, it was a far cry from those first few segments over the summer. Instead, they were introduced with a series of bright, energetic videos that paired the wrestlers up with a gospel choir embracing the power of positivity. Unfortunately, there's no faster way to get wrestling fans to boo someone than to tell them they should be cheering, and the New Day wound up becoming bad guys just by virtue of being overbearing. But then the more ridiculous their antics got, the more the crowd embraced them. That happens pretty often in pro wrestling. Characters like The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and more recently Kevin Owens all became beloved superstars by just being too entertaining as bad guys. Before long, the New Day followed the same route, and it turned out that they had actually used that power of positivity that had initially annoyed the audience to become fan favorites, which only made their antics get bigger and more ridiculous. At one point, they even made their entrance at WrestleMania by dropping out of a 10-foot-tall box of Booty-O's cereal while dressed as Dragon Ball Z characters, which is like 3 different layers of goofiness going on at the same time. But they weren't just a comedy act. Those years also saw some fantastic wrestling from the 3 performers, including a lengthy span as the SmackDown Tag Team Champions. Their third of 4 championship reigns was, at the time, the longest since the title's inception, and a series of matches with the Usos that culminated at Hell in a Cell 2016. In the lead-up to 2019's WrestleMania 35, Kofi found himself, and his partners in the New Day, embroiled in a storyline that saw Kofi being denied a shot at WWE's highest championship despite earning it time and time again. The chief obstacle here wasn't Daniel Bryan, the defending champion who, like Kofi, had once been denied opportunities despite winning over the crowd with athleticism and charisma. It was WWE Chairman Vince McMahon himself, or at least the fictional version of Vince McMahon that the real-life guy plays on the camera. He was the one who took Kofi out of a promised championship match in favor of another wrestler, and then told him he could only earn his shot at the title if he defeated a gauntlet of 5 other wrestlers, one right after the other. Kofi did that, wrestling for over an hour, but McMahon then added a 6th match against Bryan that Kofi lost. He was given insurmountable odds, but in the end, he finally got his shot at the biggest show of the year. Of course, that was all the fictional storyline that was playing out on TV every week. It did, however, have some basis in real life. Kofi had, after all, been with the company for 11 years and even had a history of real-life conflict with Vince McMahon. As wrestler Chris Jericho noted in his book, Vince had taunted Kingston as a rookie, telling him that maybe one day he'd get over or become popular with fans. Kofi was encouraged by Jericho to fight back, and during their altercation, Vince went for a double-leg takedown and kicked off a brief fight with a happy ending. Vince wound up telling Kofi that he was glad he stood up for himself, and after a decade that's seen him win every active championship in the company, it's safe to say that Kofi got over in a big way.
This is all I've ever wanted to do ever since I was a kid, man. This is like literally my childhood dream coming true.
WrestleMania 35 was one of the most significant WrestleManias in the history of the WWE. It was the first Mania to be main evented by female wrestlers, with Becky Lynch defeating Charlotte Flair and Ronda Rousey to win the company's 2 women's titles, cementing Lynch's place as the top star in the company regardless of gender. And it was the show where Kofi Kingston won the WWE Championship, becoming the first African-born world champion in the company's long history. It's not just the fact he was born in Ghana that puts Kofi into rarefied air, though. On April 7, 2019, he became only the 4th black man to hold the WWE's top title, and if you want to be really precise, only the 2nd to hold the specific WWE Championship. The first black man to hold that title was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who won his first championship in 1998. The only other black men out of the 51 to hold the championship were Booker T and Mark Henry.
Representation is so important, to be able to have people that look like us, to be able to look at the screen and see that it's possible to do great things.
The unfortunate fact, and one that came up throughout Kofi's chase for the title, is pro wrestling has often been slow to recognize black performers, a problem not limited to the WWE. There wasn't a black world champion anywhere in wrestling at all until 1992, when Ron Simmons won World Championship Wrestling's top title. Kingston lost the title to Brock Lesnar in a very short match on the premiere episode of SmackDown on Fox on October 4, 2019. But even with that loss, Kofi's 180-day title reign was incredibly meaningful to a lot of wrestling fans, and no one can take that away. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite wrestling stars are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.